And we're going to start this off with something a little fun. So Davita's company, Acclima, I'm working on my pronunciation here. You guys have a sensor-based system for detecting air quality, indoor and outdoor. So tell us what we might not know about the air quality in a room like this one, or say in your typical conference room.
Sure.
Why do we feel drowsy?
Yeah, so if people are feeling drowsy, it's not because the conference is running long. It could be because CO2 levels are increasing. And so what we find is that in the effort to make our buildings more energy efficient, we've actually sealed them and are trapping pollutants indoors. And so what we find is that CO2 levels in one of our conference rooms, for example, is consistently exceeding 1,000 ppm, which according to a recent Harvard study is the level of CO2 that starts to affect cognitive performance.
Okay.
And attention span.
So just take a lot of breaths if you want to ask smart questions later on. So I want to ask all of you, we hear a lot and we've heard a lot for so many years about big data and sensors and kind of machine intelligence all coming together and creating all these new possibilities. But just because you have a lot of data doesn't mean that you can actually do that much with it. So what out there have you seen or done? It can be your own technology, but it doesn't have to be, that's actually really game-changing today. Do you want to start, Ben?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the most exciting thing that I see as an application of big data and sensors coming together is probably all the work that's coming on autonomous vehicles. You know, both some of the preparatory work, the sensors that go out to make it possible, as well as what each vehicle is leveraging on board. You know, and what's really interesting about that particular application is that a lot of that data is actually necessary. You know, you really do need all of that information in order to build a vehicle that can safely navigate itself and can tell the ducks crossing the road from the kids and the bicycles and the other cars. Which it's distinct from a lot of other applications of big data. You know, oftentimes big data can either be used, it's value neutral. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, or it can just be useless. A lot of people collect data just because they can. And I think, especially within the built environment, and especially as sensors become cheap, we always question ourselves and encourage others to make sure that they're making good business use of their resources. Do they really need to capture that data, and what can they do if they do uniquely capture that new type of data?
Okay, so autonomous vehicles. You didn't go to Nest, but you kept it in the family.
That's
Google family. Yeah. Shiraz, what about you?
Well, I think one of the most kind of mind-blowing meetings I had was recently reconnect with Davita, and I have an 8-year-old who had really bad asthma first 2 years of his life, and wherever you go in the world, it's actually not that easy to get good air quality data. And so just looking at some of the charts that Acclima produces, I was like, why doesn't this exist at scale? And so huge props to the great work they've done. I think in terms of trying to answer your question, I think the places where there's been more of those mind-blowing experiences, kudos to Ben and Nest, comes on companies that are focused on the consumer side. So I'm spending some of my time being like, wow, why can we have like 322 types of like Fitbits, And why can nobody measure the vibration of pumps in a factory? So good news is there are folks that are actually getting a lot of inspiration. A company called Petasense is creating a Fitbit for pumps. And it's just like put something on a pump, measure the vibration, send it up into the cloud, and then big data analytics that we've all talked a lot about, and you can actually be like, oh, this one's about to fail. So that's that kind of like getting inspiration from where there's been really interesting things on the consumer side and take them to industry where people really haven't applied the low-cost sensors and the big data and analytics. That's what is really inspiring me.
Yeah, and
Davita?
So what we're really excited by is the use of sensors at very large scale, so very large scale distributed networks for enterprises, for cities, and what we're really just focused on is bringing a new capability to society. So the capability for distributed sensor networks to give us a picture of how our buildings and our cities are living and breathing, and actually see that in real time and understand that these are really dynamic systems. They're complex systems, but they've been invisible to us. And so this capability to really map the invisible world around us starts to open up our eyes to what's actually happening in the environment and how the types of energy choices that we're making are putting pollutants into the environment and connecting to health outcomes. So we can suddenly start to connect energy to health, and it changes the conversation in some very powerful ways.
So what's different about the way that you are going about this today, measuring air quality, indoor and outdoors, than what the EPA has done for years?
Sure. So to date, most environmental quality measurement at scale has been done by governments. It's typically driven by regulation, and the equipment that's used is very expensive and difficult to deploy. So in the United States, the EPA has done a fantastic job of measuring ambient measurements, background levels of air quality, but we don't understand what's happening at the human scale, at the street by street, block by block scale, and it turns out that pollution and emissions actually vary at that level. And once we understand that, we can start to understand sources of emission and sites of exposure. So what communities are being impacted? You know, why are we seeing higher asthma rates in a particular pocket in a city? And really start to drive and understand the relationships at a much more granular level, such that we can actually take action.
Explain, by the way, how you're doing this with Google.
So we have a number of partners. At Aclima, we really believe in cooperative advantage instead of competitive advantage. And so we partner with companies and organizations to make our technology better, but also to deploy it. And so we're partnered with Google. One of the projects that we announced last year is an effort to test our sensor platform on their Street View vehicles so that we can take city scale and community scale snapshots of air pollution and emissions. And so suddenly we can have a city scale image of what's really happening on the ground and at a street by street level. We also have a number of major scientific partnerships with the EPA and others to ensure that the data that we're delivering is high quality data, because if people are going to be making decisions off of this information, it needs to be grounded in science.
And I think, I mean, you hit on something interesting, which is the people, the consumer part of this, and then of course the other end of it, the businesses and the grid in some cases. And
Yes.
Shiraz, you wrote this a while ago, and Ben, I'm sure you'll have comments on this as well, but the power sector is built around large centralized plants that send their power through inefficient and one-way transmission and distribution lines to uninformed customers. I'm sure that's kind of a controversial statement for some, but describe what you're seeing and how startups fit into the kind of this new ecosystem and the role that consumers are increasingly playing, and of course the businesses and the infrastructure side of it.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, what I had written isn't necessarily that unique, but it's the idea that a lot of folks here.
It was very eloquent, though.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. But it was moving from this centralized system to a much more decentralized system. And I think consumers are playing a huge role. Say, I want Nest. I don't want, I care about the brand, I care about the product. I want to make those decisions. So there's a lot more intelligence at the nodes. And I think what I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about is, as people make these decisions, the overall system doesn't necessarily yet work all that well together. So with all due respect to the great work Nest and others are doing to create these ecosystems, a lot of these different pieces don't necessarily talk to each other. So I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about cloud software opportunities that can really connect the dots and create a lot more value at the consumer level, but then also, to your question, make the grid and the underlying systems much, much more effective. And I think it certainly applies to power, but for me, it applies to water and lots of other types of verticals as well.
So on that note, part of the power and the potential of Nest is the data that you can share, right? And I know you guys have done a lot on that front with third parties. What are you sharing with the utilities, and what's kind of the next evolution in how much you share and, in order to harness more and more of the power of Nest?
Well, again, the data itself is value neutral. So what we're trying to do at Nest is really to abstract it out into something that's useful. We simply don't, as a matter of practice, stream data about an individual home to anybody, anywhere. None of our partners would have that unfettered access, not least of which because it's not necessary, but also because it's very difficult when you're talking about the consumers, the residential sector. You have hundreds of millions of homes, and any given manufacturer, any given utility don't necessarily you shouldn't presume any right to be within their walls. You need to have an invitation to come in, either that or a warrant. But but better an invitation, and you need to be a good house guest if you want to stay there. And certainly streaming, a bunch of activity that's representative of how people live their private lives in their home, that's dangerous territory, and we want to stay away from that. But to the citation that you gave from Shiraz there, and to his commentary on it, we certainly agree. There's humongous potential, both from an environmental perspective, from an economic perspective, a multi-billion-dollar potential each and every year to make better use of all these individual nodes. And it's not just about sensors. It's about a combination of sensors and command and control systems. The notion that you could, for example, take all these individual nodes of residential air conditioners, and that you could fiddle with them in order to deliver a cleaner, more reliable grid experience. That's not new. Folks have been doing that for a couple decades now, but they've been doing it literally with pagers, one-way pagers. Signal would come out over the airwaves, and air conditioners would turn off. And that proved to be proved some early results, but fall far short of what we all know is the potential. One, because a lot of the folks that manufacture pagers have since gone out of business, and these investment in technologies.
Well, until the wire came along, and then that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And so you have that, and two, people don't like having their air conditioner turned off arbitrarily without recourse on the day where they want it the most. So what we've been doing is, putting our devices, two-way communicating devices, with sensors that know when people are present, know when they're not present, that use the learning algorithms within them to get a good sense of what makes you individually comfortable, to find a way to modulate temperature specific to that individual home, and to speak back up to Shiraz's point of the network as a whole. What's going on across a pool of people? How can we non-obtrusively engage all of these sensors, all these devices to deliver very powerful, meaningful results.
So how many of you are familiar with rush hour rewards? Okay, I think you need an explainer.
So rush hour rewards is Nest's clever rebranding of demand response. How many are familiar with demand response? All right, so
how many of you like the term rush hour rewards better than demand response? A few.
Yeah, right. I demand, you respond. It's not a very compelling consumer marketing. So rush hour rewards is meant to sort of convey the notion that, hey, there's congestion on the grid. You understand the rush hour analogy, and there are rewards available to you to be part of the solution. And you like rewards, right? You like it's novel to be paid by your utility. You're used to paying your utility, that they'll pay you to help operate the grid more effectively in a way that benefits everybody, benefits the utility, benefits the technology partners, benefits the people in their homes. That's pretty cool. And so that's rush hour rewards is better, more human demand response.
By the way, have you seen any actually uptick in energy usage among Nest customers because they're able to set their air conditioner, put their air conditioner on before they get home?
Oh, sure. And I mean, there's the more classic case of, you're sitting on the couch and, in yesteryear, you wouldn't have mustered the energy to go all the way across the room, to turn the temperature. But now it's the space age. You can do that from the couch. There's certainly people that get our technology that use more by embracing the convenience, but there's a lot more that use a lot less by virtue of the smart defaults. So on average, the average Nest home saves about 10 to 13% of its heating and cooling load without really having to think about energy, because as much as we all here enjoy thinking about energy, most people in the mass market would rather not, but they do enjoy paying less each month for their comfort and for the privilege.
Davida, are you seeing interest from consumers?
Absolutely. So, as a company, we have to solve for two core problems. One is the technology, making sure that the technology is solid, and data quality is a core component of that. The other element, excuse me, that we have to solve for.
The air quality must not be that good.
It's the air quality, I'm sorry. The other element that we have to solve for is distribution. And so we're not going direct to consumer. We're really trying to figure out how to deploy these networks at a massive scale. And then consumers are a potential consumer of the data that the networks generate. But we're really trying to solve for how do we quantify the environment at scale. And so Google is one partner where we're able to really leverage the reach of their distribution platform. But there's a number of others that we're working with.
Okay. And Shiraz, what else are you seeing? You invest in a lot of companies and you advise several. What else are you seeing that we're just starting to scratch the surface of?
Sure. Water, we've talked a lot about at this conference. Kudos to you and your colleagues. But I think in terms of actual deployments of big data technologies, very little. I have a friend who works at an engineering firm that told me the quality of their clients' utility data is so poor that any customer that complains about their bill, they just cave because they don't have any good data to kind of defend it. So it's like, it's really, really poor. And yet there are massive problems. I started my career as a civil environmental engineer, and you're taught we need $1 trillion more of infrastructure. Yet more intelligent machines and data in the water infrastructure can solve a lot of these problems. So a company called Opti is trying to really look at weather patterns and say, wow, there's a big storm coming. And instead of a very typical combined sewer stormwater overflow that creates big problems, they can actually sort of drain the system and provide a little bit of intelligence, which I think is, perhaps a little bit niche, but for me, mind-blowing, having been told the only solution is sort of replace all the infrastructure. I'll just briefly say waste management. Why can no one create a smart data sensor system so every business can measure how much trash and recycling? This is something I've heard from many executives. I get this bill from my big trash hauling company. No idea if that's true. No, there's no data. That's crazy. So those are two examples.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Raise your hand and a mic will go around. Can you introduce yourself?
Catherine Von Berg, Simplify Power Storage. I'm just interested, given the question, and Shiraz, to your point, top-down, centralized generation distribution, and the earlier panel, smart cities, and this whole question of interconnectivity and a distribution system that is digital, not analog. But given the rising occurrence of power outages, Eaton Corporation creates an annual report. They indicated for 2014 that 15 million people were without power, some for days or weeks in the United States in 2014. They're still counting for 2015. And the economic fallout, depending on estimates, is somewhere around $150 billion. So I'm just wondering if you could address the question of how you create this interconnectivity and the bi-directional feedback loop that is happening with centralized distribution where it's not top-down, it's coming back up the grid, information systems, but how you build in resiliency and security with increasing cyber attack and climate change and power failure, and really incorporate distributed assets in conjunction with centralized?
Sure.
That's an easy question.
Yeah. The answer is 3. I know you're working in batteries, and storage is a big part of that, and building into that resiliency. And I don't think there's an easy answer. And security is really a fascinating space that is now, the more and more our objects are getting connected, the more and more they're at risk of a terrorist attack. So I think there's a lot of merit to your concern. I guess what I see is just like we've built redundancy in systems like the internet and other things, there's far more positives than negatives around enhancing that overall system risk as we put more and more connectivity and intelligence over at the edge. So, clearly security is a big challenge there, but yeah, that's my short answer. And storage plays a huge role in the power sector. For sure.
As far as Nest and Aklama go, I mean, how do you guys think, and how do you build in security features from, as you've designed your products?
I mean, security has to be the first thing that you think about, especially if you're talking about inside the built environment, inside people's homes, when you're especially when you're able to control things in the home, especially when you start to get in the category of access to the home, as some of our partners have done. You don't get any do-overs there. One primetime news story about how the connected product let in the burglar would be very, very bad. So you make sure you hire some very smart people that are very well grounded in this, and you make sure you test aggressively. This isn't a sector where you can iterate fast and send something out there and see how it goes. There have been some folks that have done that. They've destroyed their own brand, but they've also tarnished the space as a whole. So we're trying as one of the leading brands to make sure that we keep as a brand value, security, privacy, and that we continue to perform and deliver on that. You don't get a lot of second chances there.
So this isn't the throwing spaghetti on the wall Google ethos when it comes to Nest.
I don't know that Google throws spaghetti either, but I'm not
anymore,
not directly involved. Yeah.
Davida, what about at
I mean,
Aklama?
very similar for us, right? We deploy sensor networks outdoors, but also in commercial buildings. And so we're talking about very large-scale enterprises. And so security is an extremely high priority for us and a core element of building customer trust and managing our networks over the long term.
Mm-hmm. Another question?
I'll sort of chime in at the end of that last question. I think it's power outages used to be more significant than internet outages or data outages. Now our folks in terms of inconvenience may flip that equation. They're okay with their cell phone with the storage, the power storage on it. They can sweat it out a couple hours so long as they can continue to entertain themselves and access the world. One of the interesting things we've seen as more and more devices connect is that an internet outage actually gets in the way of a lot of convenience that people enjoy, and they detect that sooner than a power outage. But one of the cool applications of that relative to the prior question is that things are, if you're accustomed to seeing things connect and all of a sudden a lot of them stop connecting in a certain area, can actually in aggregate help to detect where power went down or where internet connectivity went down. A lot of fun applications to increase the public good and to increase individual enjoyment will come as we see more and more devices online as we begin to tap some of these opportunities together.
So I want to ask you guys each just one last question, but I've just always been curious. So what's the most popular temperature, the most common temperature before and after Nest? Like if you're a consumer, and you're not me, so it's not, I'm too embarrassed to even tell you guys what I set my apartment to. But
well, I mean, there are we have white papers on the topic for those that are truly interested or otherwise have insomnia. But we're a very diverse people as a country. Nest sells in 7 countries around the world, and we've seen our devices come online in nearly 200 countries through the vast thermostat smuggling rings that apparently exist. But to kind of sidestep your question that the white paper answers in more detail, the one thing I will say is I challenge anybody in this room to send me a thermostat that has ever been advertised or that has its packaging that doesn't say 72 degrees on the box. All of our marketing teams across the entire industry universally agree that if you're going to sell a thermostat, the box should always say 72 degrees.
72.
That's right.
But you don't get the little green leaf for 72.
You don't. No, you got to earn that.
If you want to earn it,
That's
you gotta lower it. So okay, last question for each of you, just real quick. You mentioned water as sort of an untapped possibility here when it comes to these technologies. What else have we not really seen come to fruition yet, but has a lot of potential when it comes to efficiency and sustainability?
Yeah, I've been helping ENGIE make investments in this space, and the most recent one was a company called Streetlight Data. that is actually not working with streetlights, but taking big data around transportation planning. And there's hundreds of billions of dollars to expand highways without good data. So that's one I'm really excited
Okay,
about.
Davida, real quick.
Well, I mean, I'll say our application is really a new area where, you know, we still haven't seen massive distribution of air quality and climate sensors. And we think that it holds tremendous potential to really help drive the conversation about sustainability and climate change at a human level and through a health lens. So really connecting planetary health and human health is at the core of our mission.